I'm just waiting for the people to come in because they're still joining.
So the stream has started already, I see.
Yes, yeah, we are live.
Nice.
So just having a look. Okay, Frau Schleif, die Nummern sind jetzt stabil.
Wir hatten 41 Anmeldungen, aber ich würde sagen, dass Sie anfangen können.
Okay, alles
klar. Dann gucken wir mal, wer noch reinkommt.
Gut, alles klar, vielen Dank. Yeah, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Welcome to Sustainability in Applied Photography. This is a talk which happens in the context of a series on photography and sustainability, which comprises 8 events taking place from May the 4th to the 19th. It aims at offering insights from different perspectives into the extent to which aspects and issues of ecological and social sustainability are visible, discussed, negotiated, and tested in photography and in visual culture. The event series is a cooperation between the Heinrich Böll Foundations in Baden-Württemberg and Rheinland-Pfalz, the Biennale for Aktuelle Fotografie, and the Institute for European Art History at Heidelberg University. My name is Henry Kieser. I'm coming from this university, from this institute where I'm teaching early modern and contemporary art history. We will discuss the topic of sustainability in applied photography this evening, in particular by using the more specific case and example of fashion and advertising photography. Because behind the production of this type of photography, there is a high consumption of resources, for example, traveling for fashion shootings, energy for photographic equipment, such as, for example, the spotlights. But then even the technique of photography, digital photography, for example, in itself is not environmentally friendly because it generates electronic waste. The production, for example, of the memory card produces high CO2 emissions, and sometimes rare earths are sometimes used. Batteries only last a maximum of 3 years, not to mention the data storage, which also consumes resources, and also the lifespan of the equipment is limited on average to around 5 years at the maximum. And so ultimately, also in a certain way, there can be a contradictory situation because it could be strange to do sustainable photography, but to advertise fashion that is not sustainable. So these are also questions which we will tackle this evening. So the questions are how to deal with this situation. If we don't want to renounce on fashion photography at all, there would be also a possibility to say we don't do that anymore, but I don't think this is an option. And which solutions, strategies could be devised to make a statement on the situation, or even better, to develop more far-reaching possibilities. And we have tonight 2 guests, which are coming from different but connected ends, if you want to say, because we have gotten one person who makes the photos, the photographer, and the other one is selecting, editing, and publishing these photos. And together we hope to discuss some questions with them and see which ways they have developed, followed, and maybe they see for the future. And the plan is, I first present these 2 guests to the audience, and I'm really happy to have them here digitally tonight with me. Then they will give some insight into things they have done in the past, accompanied by images. And we then go into questions how to maybe go on from there. As a note for the audience, you always have the possibility to ask questions, because there is an F&A section here on Zoom. You can type in your questions there. I will look into them from time to time. So we take your questions into our talk. Or this was also the idea that the last 15 to 20 minutes, we will entirely devote to questions coming from the audience. So you have the possibility to participate in the talk, why it's ongoing, by sending questions, and we will give you the possibility in the last 15 to 20 minutes to specifically then address questions to our two guests, and I will pass them on to them. So we start. I first present to you the producer, and then afterwards the editor, so to speak. I will give you the names from both right away so that it's not a mystery, but you can also already see their names. We have Simon Veith here tonight from Cologne, and we have Emanuele Farnetti from Milan, from Mailand. And I will first start with presenting Simon Veith. He studied from 2009 to 2013 health promotion, Gesundheitsförderung, at the Hochschule Fulda as part of his bachelor studies. Afterwards, from 2013 to 2015, he did his master studies, business administration, with a focus on health economics, before he then started to study in 2016 photo design at the Online-Schule für Gestaltung. He, in 2016, opened his own business, Simon Veith, Sustainable Photography, Nachhaltige Fotografie. And he's not just active as somebody who's doing photographs, but he's also doing series of exhibitions on topics such as, and I quote just 3 exhibitions from 2018, Nachhaltige Porträtfotografie, Sustainable Portrait Photography in Darmstadt, or Sustainable Advertising Photography, also nachhaltige Werbefotografie in Münster, or Fair Fashion Photography in Dortmund, also photography on fashion, which is also produced and sold in a fair way, fair trade. And in 2021, he has started a portrait project, Green in Color, Sustainability at Work, Grün in Bunt, Nachhaltigkeit im Beruf. And he has also a website on which he is publishing from time to time texts on the topic. The last article I saw is Who Made My Clothes? From Fast to Fair Fashion and the Role of Photography, Quantity Before Quality, ? And so, Simon Veith, welcome this evening. And I've got 3 questions for you. What challenges do you see for sustainable fashion photography? Where do you see these challenges especially? And what and which strategies have you developed, or would you further develop in order to overcome these challenges?
Yes, thank you so much for your nice introduction. So here I am, I'm Simon Veith, and thanks for the questions again. And I see the biggest challenges is in working ethically, working carbon free or carbon positive, climate positive, maybe even. And yeah, to have a photo production which is completely as green as possible, I would say. So there's not only me in the fashion photography, there's also a makeup artist, a fashion stylist, the fashion brand itself. So the customers must be ethically or green or even fair fashion, sustainable fashion. So that's quite big challenges. So since today, most of the time, maybe photographers use yeah, like not green power, green energy for the photography, for example, which is a small part. Yeah, that's basically, and I would say where do I see it in the next years? I think so. I'm doing this for now like almost 6 years, and I see a big progress in other photographers who think a sustainable approach is pretty cool to go out and market it also. So. And even to strengthen their approach on their attitude and their working, their way of working, so to say. So I see that there's a lot of change in the last couple of years, and so there's a lot of things to come, I think. So there will be big production who were completely carbon free or even carbon positive, I don't know yet. I know a studio, which is like a real big film studio, it's next to Cologne in Monheim, who's working almost carbon free. He has like solar power on its door, and it's like a 20 meters hohlkehle background design, and it's so big and it's so cool that they also already work environmental friendly in such big productions. So there's a lot to come. And even big TV centers like RTL Germany, they also have a new little section in their policy, which means that they want to work more sustainable in the future. So they don't build like a whole new TV show every time new for every season. So they keep it for the next season, which is kind of insane. So they in the past times they just trashed it and get it new done because the storage was more expensive than keeping it for the time. Yes, and that was a lot already. And which strategies do I have? So I, as you mentioned before, I work completely carbon free, which means I have a really sustainable way of working, and which means, for example, in energy, in banking, in green hosting, I have a really small website which produces so few carbon emissions, and I have a small biogas car for my photo productions, which I use mostly when I can't use a train or my bike, of course. So I keep all emissions down, and when I can't even lower it, I'm comprehending a lot of CO2 with a abonnement. And besides that, I'm additionally planting 100 trees for each photo session. So I'm, when you say under the line, I'm kind of carbon positive or climate positive. So I give out more CO2 equivalents than I produce. So which means my work is better for the environment, actually. That's some strategies I have. Yeah, thanks. So, thanks a lot.
Okay, thank you. So now we come to the editor, Emanuele Farnetti. He graduated with honors in law from the State University of Milan at the beginning of his career. He then took his first steps in the world of journalism in 1995, first with video and television journalism, before moving on to print media, where he became editor of magazines such as Men's Health, Panorama, and after 2015, AD, Architectural Digest, and then GQ Italia in 2016. In January 2017, he was appointed editor of Vogue Italia, L'Uomo Vogue, and the digital platform of Vogue, Vogue ET. And he was praised when he arrived at Vogue to have brought, I quote, surprising innovation, visual freshness, and quality of the highest order, end quote. And he did not only did work with the magazine's most celebrated photographers, opening the door to a new generation, but Vogue Italia then also dedicated in October 2017 a cover to Lauren Hutton, the first woman over 70 years to appear on the cover of any Vogue issue. So it's also about opening up to other age states. And under Farnetti, Vogue Italia integrated fashion and journalism and did present therefore fashion as a means capable of addressing also pressing issues, especially those related to sustainability, diversity, inclusivity, and body positivity. So in February 2020, the cover of Italian Beauty sparked a political controversy because of the skin color of the model, the young Italo-Senegalese Mati Diba Fall. But Farnetti also included the pandemic. So in April 2020, when the COVID-19 pandemic struck, Vogue Italia was the first international magazine to report on restricted fashion. And the cover, which was all white at the gesture of respect and silence, was conceived and received around the world and became a sort of symbol image of the moment. And in June 2020, the issue was also dedicated to the impact of the pandemic, with cover images created by children aged 2 to 10. And in September of the same year, 2020, the magazine appeared with a record of 100 covers, each dedicated to a woman of different age, profession, skin color, and sexual identity. And why is here tonight with us? Already in January 2020, an issue of Vogue Italia was published that for the first time was completely devoid of fashion photography in order to symbolically reduce the carbon footprint of the magazine's production. And we will later have a look onto this cover. After having been appointed director also of AD Italia, Farnetti left the management of Vogue Italia, Uomo Vogue, in July 2021, and he's now editor-in-chief of the fashion contents at La Repubblica and the editor-in-charge of La Repubblica delle Donne, the weekly supplement. So welcome, Emanuele Farnetti. I've got the same questions for you. What challenges do you see for sustainable fashion photography? Where do you see these challenges, and which strategies have you developed or would you further develop for these challenges? Thank you.
Thank you for this kind introduction. Good evening, everyone. Before we discuss future, let me just give you a few more details about what we did at Vogue. Henry kindly mentioned. I think in order to give a bit of a context of what we did at Vogue Italia in this last 4 or 5 years, it's good to remember to the audience that Vogue Italia has used to have a very specific DNA that is different than other Vogues. And each single major Vogue has a slightly different positioning and a different DNA. I was called to replace a legendary editor named Franca Sozzani that unfortunately passed away weeks before I joined the magazine. And what Franca did at Vogue Italia was, in her over 25 years of being editor-in-chief of the magazine, was obviously a big inspiration for us. Franca did quite a few memorable decisions while she was there, but what I think is most relevant for the conversation today is that she was the first to understand that a fashion magazine could have a strong voice on important topics that were not, the typical content of a fashion magazine. She is still well remembered for a few issues that she edited when she was there. Probably the most popular one was called the Black Issue, and because Vogue Italia was the first within a magazine, major fashion magazine, to dedicate an entire issue to black and brown models back in 2008, if I remember right, which is kind of obvious today, but it was not obvious by then. And together with Steven Meisel, that was the master of photography, she gave each single cover for more than 20 years. They were able to develop a very specific take on topics, including the oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico, violence of the police, and some other, the body positivity, the abuse of plastic surgery. So the DNA of Vogue Italia was a lot, even before me and my team joined the magazine, was a lot about using the voice, that strong local and international voice of Vogue Italia, to do something meaningful. Not every single issue, of course, not every single time. Even Frank is remembered for just a small percentage of issues among the many she did. But when it comes to time, Vogue Italia, people do expect, and when I say people, I mean the industry and the readers and the audience, the digital audience, expect Vogue Italia to do something meaningful. And this is what we try to do together with my team. And the examples you mentioned are probably the ones that we actually are a little bit more proud and happy to remember. And so what we did basically was using the voice of Vogue Italia to give a take on relevant subjects. Among these, obviously, sustainability and fashion as a very relevant one for several reasons. Obvious reasons, of course. But what I think about, cover the challenge of covering these topics on a fashion magazine, on a fashion platform, again, there are a lot of things to keep in mind, and I really think it's very, very difficult. And this is the conversation we had with my team before sending to decide the concept of that non-photography issue you mentioned. The challenge are obviously that we are, when you do, most of the magazines are on a regular basis sending to print what we call the green issues, and I kind of try to avoid to do like a simple once in a while green issue for several reasons. First is that, to be totally honest, it's very difficult to have within a magazine, within an editorial team, the knowledge to actually judge what it's green and when it's not. We don't have the knowledge to certify behaviors, and this is one of the things we need to keep in mind. Second is that obviously we deal with advertisers, and every single fashion brand pretends to be green, and we are not in the position of judging, again, to judge behaviors and to actually give patent of being green or not green to single brands. Third, I really think that it's kind of, and this is, as much as it's very important for everyone, to cover these topics, but if I have to be extremely honest with you, I also find quite difficult to make these topics extremely interesting when it comes to doing monthly fashion magazine. And then on another level, I think it's also kind of hypocritical for fashion magazines to cover these topics, because honestly, it's not just a matter of photography or not photography, and it's not even a matter of how much the fashion industry is a non-sustainable industry, and we all know that. But I don't think it's just a practical thing. It's also like something that goes on a deeper level. The fashion industry relied for decades, since its early days, into absolutely not sustainable message that it's convincing as many people as possible to buy as many things as they can, and things they basically don't need. So I'm a bit, uncomfortable when I see people doing my job pretending to be champions of sustainability, while since a couple of years ago, they were just pushing readers to buy a lot of useless stuff, including fast fashion. So this is just to say that when we decided to use the Vogue Italia voice to do something around sustainability, we were looking for a very specific idea in order to give us, as you said, a message, like a symbolic message. And what we think it's always a good approach is that before you pretend other people to change their behaviors, you should do something yourself. And in that case, the symbolic gesture we did was try and find out what happens to a fashion magazine, a big relevant fashion magazine, if the magazine decides for once not to shoot fashion photography. And so that's when in January 2020, we ended up doing a fully illustrated issue, working with 5 or 6 or 7 different artists that we might mention later. So what we did was challenge ourselves into doing a magazine without fashion photography, see what the result would look like, for at least for once reduce our carbon footprint. And then again, it's just a very simple little symbolic gesture. And there's a little layer that we felt like adding to this concept we did. And so basically what we did was giving the money we save by not shooting fashion photography to a foundation in Venice that was severely damaged by the high flood that hit Venice like three or a couple of months before the magazine came out. So that issue was just a little, symbolic sign with a little symbolic positive consequence to someone that really needed help in that moment that they were trying. It's called Fondazione Querini Stampaglia. They have an amazing collection of books that needed to be saved quickly or they would be lost forever. And so that's what we did. And we were honestly very pleased by the reaction, because I think that people understood the spirit of it. That was not it was not just pretending that fashion photography is not relevant anymore. It's not useful anymore. I do believe the opposite. I do believe that fashion photography still has a very important role to play. But it was just, again, do something different and symbolic to challenge ourselves and also to help someone in need. That's where we went for with that specific with that issue you mentioned.
Mm-hmm. You both brought images, and I suggest, since you just talked about the covers, we just have a brief look into that, and afterwards we go to Simon Veith, and he gives us an insight into his work.
Will you share the screen for me?
I will share the screen. Yeah, just have to quickly have to change. Yeah, there we go.
Well, what it's kind of interesting to mention, but this is just purely a coincidence, is that a nice side effect of that issue was that we took the light back on a very specific form of art, that it's fashion illustration, that was kind of not very popular by then. There were not many magazines using illustrations, and so the issue became quite popular also because people were not expecting, to see fashion illustration back again in these days. And then eventually, like 3 or 4 months after, and this is just a bad coincidence, we all got into pandemic, and so shooting photography was almost not possible anymore. So most of the magazine ended up using illustrations instead of photography for a while, following our path. But this is, again, just a coincidence, I guess. 7 covers, I think. This is David Saul, and this is a beautiful artwork, and we decided to ask him to work together with a legendary fashion editor named Tony Goodman, legendary American Vogue fashion editor. So it's not only the cover, but the whole story is a proper fashion editorial, because it's the result of a collaboration between a photographer and a relevant editor. Paolo Ventura, local painter, born fashion photographer. Each single shoot had like a real casting process. So this is a very famous model today. She's pretty much everywhere. This is her first cover. So we took picture. He took. They had a conversation on screen, and so Paolo was able to take screenshots of the screen, and starting from there, he worked again with our fashion team to decide the outfits, and this is the result. Delphine Design, beautiful painting made in New York. Yoshitaka Amano. So we were also kind of willing to blend the different styles, different forms of illustration. So obviously Japan is a strong reference in this field. So we were lucky enough to work with a master of fashion illustration. Vanessa Beecroft, beautiful. She loves fashion, so she didn't need any editor. She picked the clothes herself, and she designed each of these stories has obviously, I think, around 10 to 12 pages features inside. This is, I don't remember, but I think this is another strong example of the covers. And this is Italian legend Milo Manara. He designed for us one of these beautiful women. So as you see, the mix of the covers is quite rich, and of course there were people collecting them. And again, it's a nice memory. We don't pretend this to become like the new standard, obviously. This is important. It's there were some controversies about this thing that Vogue Italia was making without fashion photography, but generally speaking, people understood that it was just, again, our own way to show a sign on a very relevant topic.
I mean, in a certain way, this goes back to the 18th century, because I can remember that fashion magazines in the 18th century were already illustrated, but of course with prints and engravings. So in a certain way, you return to the birth of the fashion magazine to certain.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I mean, fashion magazines, including Vogue, American Vogue, used illustration for decades before turning into photography. Then once in a while, obviously, they were with painters and different artists. But as far as I remember, none of them actually work just with illustrators for an entire issue. And I guess it's what made the Vogue Italia issue quite relevant.
Yeah, thank you. Simon Veith, this can't please you, what we just saw, because it means you are unemployed, because fashion magazines do it without photographers.
Oh, we got back to photography that was January, and then we got back to photography in February, just to be honest. And we kept using photography even during pandemic, because it was kind of interesting to experience new forms of fashion photography remotely in lockdown. So again, we love fashion photography, and Simon, this is to you.
Yeah, I think it's totally fine. I think it was a great idea to use illustrations, and yeah, it was probably good for the environment in general, because a lot of CO2 was reduced, or prevented, and yeah, so I think it's not a bad thing. So we couldn't work anyways, so it was a really good solution, I think. So props to you.
So how do you do it? You just described it in general, but you also brought images. Maybe you want us to show them and say something about it?
Me? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Sure.
Yeah. Okay. So here we go. So just tell me when you want to go ahead with the slides.
Yes. So yeah, that's me basically. My face and my logo. Next slide. That's my concept, and generally. So it's the first part is green customers. So I couldn't work environmental friendly if I work for bad customers, or I mean for fast fashion, for H&M, you know the thrill. So I'm focusing, or mostly I only shoot for green customers, which is mostly fair fashion, even fair fashion brands who work and produce in Cologne, for example, which are great, and yeah, stuff like this, or even NGOs or social how do you say, social enterprises, of course. And my aim is to help them to have a positive impact on the world, on the society, on the environment. And it's like my first and most my first goal in my work. And the second part of my concept is my way of working, which is sustainable, as I mentioned before. And since I'm doing this since 2016, I was in the beginning, I was like climate friendly, and my goal was becoming climate positive, which I am now. And the third part is the lasting imagery, which means I have my imagery, my photo look is compelling. It's kind of ageless. I try to have it ageless. It's warm and positive, and yeah. And I'm trying to work with my customers as long as possible to have a long-lasting imagery in their brand as well. So they when people see their photos, they know, oh, it's this brand. And yeah, so I'm trying to work out a unique imagery for every customer I work with. Yeah. So next slide. And that's actually my way of working. So I was telling some of the stuff before. I'm sorry, my the chart is in German, so sorry for that. But it's basically my green office. So I work mostly online. My banking is online, and my Steuerberater, how do you say?
Tax advisor.
Yeah, tax consultant, tax advisor. He works also online, so I don't have to send him my paper. Yeah, I print only on of course on blauer engl certified paper here. My transport is, as I mentioned, I try to take the bike, or I walk there, or I take the train or the KVB in Cologne. Or at least when I can't do all of them, I take my biogas car, which is pretty sustainable itself. And additionally, I compensate every kilometer I travel. I have to travel with my car, so I'm completely carbon free there. Then my equipment, I try to get it as sustainable as possible. It's not always possible, of course. For example, I got a Cologne branded light system, and then half year later, they were called Multiblitz. They went bankrupt, so they were not selling the lights after I bought them. So I couldn't extend my lighting techniques. Yeah, that was kind of bad, but I tried to get this brand because they were producing in Cologne, which is great. I was going there and picking that up myself at their factory. But I get most of the stuff I get like secondhand, or I get mostly secondhand, or sometimes I have to buy it new. But I'm also trying to sell my old stuff, of course, so it's getting used after I used it. That's really important, I think. So I don't have any old MacBooks lying around here, or iPhones or stuff like this. I also sell it when I have to, when I can't use it anymore for my photography. I have, of course, green energy at home, and in my studio I have a fair banking. My website is fair hosted and even really small. And additionally to that, I plant trees, like 100 trees per shooting ever. And nowadays I was able to plant over 5,000 trees, which were contained around 1,660 tons of CO2 equivalent in the next 25 years. So I plan to go like deep. I plant mangrove trees in Madagascar, which is also a social enterprise. They provide working days for people there, and it's a great thing. And I can really do good for the world climate. That's what I really like about that. Okay, next slide. I think, yeah, there's a little bit more of my lasting imagery. So it's I'm trying to get long-term collaboration with other Korean brands. My photos, I try them to be ageless, positive, and warm. And here you see Arnold Schwarzenegger. He was visiting the World Sustainable World Conference. How was it called, in Bonn in 2017, and I worked there for another customer. It was called C40 Cities, and I just saw them and I snapped a photo for them, and it was a funny thing. But that's kind of my style. It's a bit warm, it's nice, it's positive, it's friendly. Yeah, it's just I think, in my opinion, a really good imagery for everyone, kind of. And on the bottom you see some of my best customers. So I worked for Demeter. It's a big bio brand in Germany. For Font Off, who are making a lot of sustainable bag packages in Germany. Sono Motors is actually a startup from Munich who are building the first, I think it's the first sun-powered car. So they have solar panels in the car, and yeah, it's good. Doesn't matter. And Vital is a really good brand from Cologne. They produce the first reusable food packages. So that you can go to a store, grab their Tupperware kinda, and go home and give it back then, and it's getting cleaned and it's getting reused. So they are tackling a big problem, which is food waste or even food packaging waste. Yeah, that's it about that. Next slide. And there's some examples of my work. So I mainly work for fair fashion brands, which I really love. I love the type of photography. My customers are great, and it's just fun doing that. And there are some examples of my works. So on the top left, there was it was for a sustainable fashion brand who were doing like how to say, to do subscriptions for fashion. So you can go to the store and take, I think it's 5 pieces each month, and you can bring them home, and you can bring it back after a month. So you have a constantly changing wardrobe, which people really like. So they're buying a lot of stuff, but there it's a good thing. You can grab it and bring it back after a while, or you keep it if you really, really want to keep it. And I made a sustainable fashion shoot outside in next to Cologne. The nice outdoor location. On the shooting on the left down, it was kind of interesting. I reused a old back paper, so the pink one. I couldn't use it anymore. It was like a piece I had to cut out because I think it was broken or there were some footsteps on it, so I couldn't use it anymore as a background. But I used it, I turned it around and used it, reused it or recycled it for another shoot. So I thought, yeah, pink and olive green are a nice combination. Yeah, so I was reusing them for another Cologne-based fashion brand. And yeah, that's basically kind of it. So, the girl on the top with the bra, so they have she's wearing a sustainable made bra from Cologne, which is also great. They're called Alice Textile. And yeah, it's so great to work with them, and it's so much fun. And even on all these shoots you see, there was either no cosmetic around or hair and makeup. Some did it themselves with just some powder, or they were professionally, they had professional makeup by green or natural organic makeup artists. Yeah, that's it on this slide. Next slide. This is more my ad photography. So there's a kind of a little bit of change in the imagery. So it's not only fashion focused, it's more product focused. Like on the top, you see the solar car on the solar panels on the top. and you see a sustainable and organic face wash left next to it. Or the bakery guy on the top left, he has maybe the most sustainable bakery in NRW at the Demeter Hof, or Demeter, how do you say, Bauernhof, which is really great. So yeah, it's so great to work with those guys. Or the bag on the top, it's a Cologne handmade cork bag, actually. So it's has such great customers who do such great things, and I'm so lucky to help them build their brand awareness through my pictures. Yeah, I think that's it. Next slide. And yeah, okay. Thanks for the interest. Anyone wants to contact me, don't hesitate. Just yeah. But let's go on with the talk.
Yeah, thank you very much. But I think that was quite an interesting insight, because my question would be now, and this is more or less addressed to both of you. You always emphasized these are clients which already have the awareness of being green, of being responsible. The products are green. But do you think there's a possibility that, because Emanuele was talking about this, he talked about education, for example. What would be necessary to convince also others who are not producing yet ecologically responsible to cast you as their photographer? Because I think that would be an important step, because so far one could say you're in a bubble, a very good bubble, but these are people who have the same consciousness like you. But in order to get it on a bigger scale, what do you think would be necessary? This is a question addressed to both of you, because Emanuele, you earlier talked also about clients, and you talked about education and knowledge, and I think that's one of the important issues.
Yeah, if I can take this, I think as much as fashion photography is an interesting and relevant subject, we need to look at the larger picture, being fashion photography a part of an industry that still needs to make big steps towards becoming really sustainable. I was thinking, first of all, just a side note before I forget, congratulations to Simon, and mostly because I think it's very important that fashion photography, when it comes to cover sustainability, brings joy, beauty, energy, color somehow, you know, because we still have the feeling that being sustainable means being dull or not sexy, which might have been the case in the early days, but nowadays there are sustainable brands that do beautiful things, and people need to understand that it's not a privation, but maybe absolutely the opposite. But then I guess, so congratulations for your photography. But generally speaking, I mean, we're part of an industry that it's far from being sustainable, and what I was impressed by is that we spend, at least here in Italy, but I think also elsewhere, the first six months of pandemic, when we were into very strong lockdown, as you probably remember, Italy was hit first and badly by coronavirus. But so we spent hours in these Zoom calls having conversation within the fashion industry with fashion people, pretending that things would have been different once the pandemic was over for good. You know, the pace of the industry would have, you know, slowed down. No more useless fashion trips, no more waste of resources, including for doing magazines, but more in general for producing fashion. And if I have to be brutally honest, we are exactly back at this in these days, we're back exactly to where we were, or at least, so there are still shows around the world, people traveling for, you know, mostly no reasons for meetings that you can easily have on Zoom. So I'm not, saying that fashion photographers or production behavior is not important, but my feeling is that it's a drop in an ocean of behaviors that need to change. Obviously, I do feel that the sensibility is different, and it's and the pressure of public opinion also through social media is getting stronger. So hopefully there are reasons for believing that these behaviors will change in the future. But if you ask me if things are drastically different today than they were just before Corona came, I have to say absolutely not. And so again, we as media should basically work in two directions. First of all, once again, not pretending others to do things that we don't do. So we definitely need to look at our behaviors first, but on one side. But then again, I think it's even more interesting if we use our voice, our power to bring forward good behaviors and to somehow force brands to fulfill what they promise, that is sometimes very different than what they actually do.
Would you think that, for example, a brand like Vogue would be able to, as you just said, force people, or to at least convince them, or because if you have a powerful magazine, is there a possibility you can make people do certain things by saying, if you don't do this, we won't do that? Or would you say this is suicide in the sense of you would kill your own magazine?
No, I don't think it will kill the magazine, but I think that it's again, it's a lot about also personal sensibility, because again, what I think it's fair enough to keep in mind is that big magazines, have been since the beginning part of a machine that was just pushing people to buy more. So I don't see, I do think that it would be, rather than now pretending people just to stop buying and reuse their grandmother's coats and repair instead of, that would be obviously the right thing to do, but I don't think that these fashion magazines are the right place to pretend to convince their readers to move into this behaviors, because again, they were promoting a very different approach until very recently. So I think it's I think the medias are they should learn themselves how to improve what they do and walk side by side with brands, encouraging the right behaviors, helping them to correct what they don't do right, and educating both brands and readers that there are a lot of things that we can all do to be better. That doesn't mean just stop buying or stop believing in the beauty of fashion, because at the end, what I think it's also important to keep in mind that I'm not a fashion person. I had the chance to edit Vogue, but I worked for different magazines before. So when I got into the fashion industry, I kind of had a little bit, a snobbish approach to fashion, and I was wrong, because I think that fashion has a strong power. Fashion brands have a huge impact on pop culture, on public opinion. So it's better to force them to use their power, their money, that it's a lot of money, to change the public opinion and to change themselves first rather than fighting them. So I think what magazines, what fashion media should do is walking side by side with brands and use the power of brands to eventually having them behaving differently than today.
Simon, would you see the possibility to convince a company to change their behavior, taking you, for example, not as a role model, but as somebody who shows that it's possible, or how would you see that?
Yeah, it's a good question. Honestly, I mostly worked for already Korean companies, and that's kind of my approach. But I would work for companies who really want to change something. So I think that's one of the first words on my website as well. So that I'm open for that too. But sadly, there are many companies who only want to have a green image, but still make profit with not so green stuff. So I'm in a dispute, I have to say. But I think it's super important to educate others on getting better, on getting greener, getting more sustainable. And others have maybe the power to educate third persons even more. So I don't have the big following on Instagram, sadly. I would like to have it to have a bigger impact on other people, but I don't. But it's super important to have it or to get it. Or like there's the biggest brand in Cologne is Angels. I think most people know it. And they have such a big impact because they're doing such great stuff with fashion. Yeah, that's. I think it's good to educate, of course. I had once I was asked to do a photo shoot for Coca-Cola actually, and I just declined it because there was nothing green in it. I think they want to promote their drink which was called Life, which was more greener than others, but still it wasn't green at all, of course. So I had to decline. So I couldn't say, hey guys, let's do this and let's make it cooler, or let's make it really greener. But there was no chance. So I had to decline it. So maybe, I'm not sure, maybe it was my mistake. Maybe I could have changed something. But as I see, the brand Life doesn't exist since 2 or 3 years anymore. It was a short thing. Nobody took it, as it seems, and nobody takes Coca-Cola for granted, of course, when they are promoting their stuff sustainable. So, yeah, it's a good question. I would say it's sometimes it's better to help others becoming more green, even if they aren't yet, than to decline. And all in all. Yeah.
Well, because Emanuele also earlier talked about knowledge. He said we wouldn't have the knowledge also how to do it, and maybe you would need somebody who knows it on your scale and who would be able to transfer this onto a bigger scale. I'm not sure how possible that is. Emanuele, how would you see the possibilities of doing something like that?
Well, I think it's part of our job to know more, understand, and also eventually be able to tell good from bad. But again, I will try to be extremely brutally honest in this conversation we're having tonight. At this stage, if we decide to run a green issue, there might be, brands willing to use that issue to explain our readers how green their behaviors are. So, and this is a challenge for, again, 2 reasons. One is dealing with someone that is also your partner, and that's obviously a bit embarrassing, but mostly is that in order to fact check what they pretend, we would need to rely on people, and I'm not meaning journalists or editors, but meaning it's as you perfectly know, it's a complex subject. So we would need to, maybe partner with agencies that actually do this fact check, green fact check on a very serious level. I'm not saying that it's impossible. I do believe it would be a very good idea. In La Repubblica, we have one of our content platforms called Green and Blue, and obviously they cover sustainability professionally in different industries on a daily basis. So for them, it's their daily job to deal with these subjects and to rely on knowledge of people that are actually extremely expert in these topics. With a fashion magazine, it's a little more difficult. So the reason for me for not doing traditional green issues is because I rather not cover these topics instead of greenwashing brands that don't deserve to go, or projects or people that don't deserve to be greenwashed. But I do think that this cannot be like a shortcut or a lazy approach to such an important subject. So I'm just aware of how difficult that can be and how risky it can be. But it's definitely something we need to deal with, I think.
Yeah, okay. Just addressing myself to the audience. If you want to ask questions, you can start right away. I'm always following the F&A, so just type in your questions and I will pass them on to our guests. But returning to the conversation, what do you think it would be possible to rise in awareness in ecological conscience in fashion, or would you say this is just the wrong area? If ever, it would be journalism or something else, but not fashion. I mean, Simon, you are trying to do that. So this question goes to both of you because you've got different experience backgrounds. But would you say, because I don't know how this worked for you, did you go to the companies which are already green, or they saw, oh, he's a green photographer, so they addressed themselves to you? Or did you also have the experience that there was somebody who before wasn't so much convinced and then suddenly saw, oh, it's actually possible? So how was the experience, and what would you think would be possible in the future?
Yeah, good question. I think it's both ways. So people came to me because I was sustainable. I also came to sustainable brands from Cologne because of it, because they are doing fair fashion or eco fashion, or how it's called. So it's kind of both ways, and I think there's the change is absolutely possible. So yeah, but it's hard. It's really hard for most of the small brands because they don't have a big following. They don't have a big impact when they post something on Instagram. Like 200 people sees that, and they probably are already green. And yeah, there's so much good content of those brands who educate or who are doing like workshops for rebuilding their own jeans. So people don't buy new jeans, but they're rebuilding or recycling or repairing their jeans, for example. Yeah, there's so much to do, and it's hard to do because we have a lack, or I say we in general, we as green companies have in general a lack of Reichweite, following, range, or reach. So it's doable, but we need more reach, I would say. And I think Mr. Farnetti has or had a lot of more reach with Vogue Italy, of course. Yeah.
If I may add one thing, is that what I'm trying to say is that I always kind of refuse simple answers to difficult questions, because it's obviously so important for all of us, including fashion brands, to become sustainable. This is obvious, and I do seriously believe that most of the brands are actually doing a big effort, if only because they are scared of what their customers might do if they understand that they are not pushing hard in the direction of being more sustainable. But take, for example, the very delicate subject of fast fashion. We all know that fast fashion has a huge impact on the planet. So from one side, you might say that those big fast fashion companies are, the big enemy, and this might somehow be the case. But on the other hand, do we really want to say that fashion should just be for people that can afford to spend 3,000 euros for a bag? So we're working on a thin line, so you want to be inclusive and democratic, but at the same time you blame fast fashion for the impact on the planet. And this is just one of the examples. Another paradox that I think is kind of interesting, considering also people that are probably following this conversation. I'm not a big fan of this, storytelling about the differences between generations, but for what I hear, for what I can see, there's an interesting paradox within what they call the Generation Z, because obviously it's a generation that is super conscious in terms of environment, but at the same time, most of them are crazy for brands and crazy for logos. How do you combine? And they're probably a lot in, as far as we know, they are much more into fashion than the couple of generations before them. So how can you be that much into fashion, but at the same time, you go at Fridays for Future? I mean, those are paradox, of course. And I'm just in this generational storytelling is very cliche and banal, I understand, but I'm just pointing out the fact that it's a good thing if we don't pretend to have simple answers to difficult questions.
I was just thinking if maybe one of the problems is that we talk about certain quotation mark enemies, like for example consumerism, where we say this is bad, but on the other hand, I think this is something which is really difficult to overcome, because consumerism is something which makes people feel good, they like it, and it's just very difficult to tell them, no, this is a bad thing, you shouldn't do that. So wouldn't be the solution more to make them buy, I know this sounds terrible, but reasonable stuff, do consumerism with the right things if you want, because recycling things is of course a good thing, but it has its limits, and people want have the feeling of buying something and affording something. So I also think these oppositions between this is bad, this is good, won't work. It's more making, for example, the bad things good by saying, if you buy things, then at least buy something reasonable or good, which makes you feel good at the same time. So I totally agree. It's too simple to have these oppositions.
And another thing that I think it's good to keep in mind is that there is a social impact on that fashion has on entire economies. Fashion is the second largest industry in my country. There are a lot of people making their living out of fashion. Easy to say that it's better to reduce but that might imply companies that are just going out of business. People that I remember years ago, Barack Obama came to Milano for a speech, and there was this conversation about automatic drive cars with no drivers, and it was like, I don't remember how many years ago, but it was a while. And it was like, and always remember what he said. He was saying that the technology was ready for that, but he, as a president, had to keep in mind that I don't remember how many 100,000 Americans making their living out of driving a car, a taxi. So are we sure? And this, when it comes to fashion, take fashion shows, for example, obviously they might look like something that belongs to a different age, even more after pandemic. Obviously, you don't need to fly to Milan or to Paris or to New York to see something that you can easily see and even better see on a screen. Fair enough. But then if you stop hosting shows, the economies of these cities will suffer a lot, and not, Giorgio Armani or Miuccia Prada, but the owner of the bar in front of their venues and the car drivers. So once again, and also if the big brands stop showing in those cities, the small brands will not get the attention that they get by, having clients and press traveling to Milan or Paris to see the big shows. So once again, it's too easy to say we don't need fashion shows anymore, and we don't, maybe, but it's always important to try and figure out also the consequences of not doing something.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm looking into the Q&A because we're close to, I said 20 to 15 minutes for the audience. Mm-hmm. I invite the audience to ask questions, but Simon, you have maybe a comment on what we just talked about?
Yeah, I was just thinking about the supply chain law, which should come or needs to come ASAP, because it would they would create the legal framework for companies to have to be more green, to have or to respect human rights, children rights along the whole global, and it really needs to come as soon as possible. I think it would be a great thing for everyone. So maybe even the biggest brands need to become really sustainable and not being profit driven only, and to produce their stuff in bad conditions and without any human rights and stuff. So I was just thinking about the politics who really have to do a better job, to strengthen the environment.
Mm-hmm. So I don't see any questions yet. Here we go. The first question. Were there any unintended consequences when you published the Vogue without photos? Emanuele, this is for you.
Mm-hmm.
Not really. I mean, there were people not getting the spirit, and so blaming the fact that we were accusing fashion photography of being something that they were actually not accusing. It was just about, again, understanding what was a possible little gesture of ours to show that other approaches are different. And but I have to say that most of the people got the spirit, and this is also what happened. And again, this was another tricky moment where you mentioned that before. So when we decided to go for our all white cover at the beginning of pandemic, it was not because of the lack of images. Honestly, we had a rich remotely shot portfolio inside, so there were plenty of images, but it was about finding something symbolic. And honestly, the conversation I had with my team those days was just like, what is a fashion magazine supposed to say while there are 100 people dying every day outside this building? And it's just like, there's just one thing we can do. We just have to be silent and respectful. And so we decided to go white. And then again, it was we were, with social media, you never know what people would get out of your intentions. we were asking ourselves whether the message was the audience was getting is that we had no images to run, or whether it was intended to be like a white flag as a symbol of surrendering. But then again, even in that case, 99% of the people following us understood the intention, and that made me think that it's as naive as it might sound. I think that at the end, if your purpose is somehow pure and honest, people, at least our audience, kind of understand it. And while if you're doing something with a purpose and you pretend to be better than you actually are, people do get it. And this, again, it sounds naive, but throughout the entire days I had at Vogue Italia, I did have this feeling of people understanding your intention. So that was the case also for the fashion illustrations issue.
But would you say that there were different audiences, like, for example, your readers on the one hand, and I don't know, the press on the other, and I don't know, the readers just accepted it and the press celebrated it? Or would you say no, the effect was more or less the same on?
Well, honestly, too, as for the illustrations, the only critical voices were people making their living out of photography, and not photographers, critics, curators. They were kind of, maybe a bit jealous about that, but both the creative community and the audience liked it, and so it was, again, we had very positive reactions.
Okay, no further question yet, but Simon, I have a question for you, because
Yes.
You said earlier you're trying to do ageless images, and I thought, isn't that a contradiction to fashion? Because fashion is about being on the spot, on time. It's very contemporary. So how do you deal with that? Because I find it interesting as a concept, but at the same time, I wonder how you do this.
Yeah, well, I think, how do you say this? Ageless, yeah. I think fashion photography, they're like on time, they're up to date, they're Vogue, so to say. But they still can be ageless. So I think fashion photography from 2 years ago would mostly still be pretty up to date nowadays. So I'm trying to stick like up to date, or to be up to date, and to have like pictures who you don't see that that I'm a eco guy from Germany who wears Birkenstock, So it has to look really good, really great, and pleasing for the eyes of the viewers. And ageless means for me that I can look at my photos, or the customers, or their interests, the buyers, and they can say, hopefully in 10 years, oh yeah, that's good work. It was up to date, back in the days, but it still looks great. So that's what I'm trying to achieve. And I think, I'm not sure if fashion photography wants to be only up to date now. I think it's more the things they show. So maybe fashion, or like fashion, it's then the clothing, the fashion, which is getting out of date, I would say. So it's I would say it's not on my point when something isn't up to date anymore in some years. So it's more the side of the fashion, I would say.
Emanuele, what are your thoughts about this?
Oh yeah, I see your point. I mean, if fashion photography is, the quality of a photo can be timeless or out of time in a good way, but fashion is by definition something that goes by very fast, even more today when I was mentioning, the pace of fashion calendar, how many collections are launched, how many drops of items, collaboration are happening in fashion today. I mean, what can fashion photography do? They're supposed to follow the pace of the industry. So it's difficult to say we slow down and we don't shoot crude collections, we don't shoot fall winter because it's too, it's again, part of a larger picture where either brands are seriously willing to slow down, that was their intention in the early pandemic days, or they don't. This is what apparently is still happening now. But if they don't slow down, how can fashion photography stop portraying what? I mean, there's no reason for fashion photography or fashion films or social media covering fashion to exist anymore if they don't follow what's new. Mm-hmm. So once again, it's a difficult balance, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I still think like the light technique, it doesn't change. So we still use Rembrandt lighting from, it was, Rembrandt like designed it on his paintings hundreds of years ago.
Yeah, that's right.
We're still using it nowadays in fashion photography. So that's my kind of maybe technical view on it. But of course, yeah, as you say, the things who are getting shown on pictures can vary, of course, yeah, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Got another question here. How could fashion wisely influence younger generations due to the already huge impact it has? What are your thoughts on that?
I would hope that the new generation will influence fashion rather than the other way around. But I do. It's important to emphasize the huge role of fashion brands. There were a study, I don't remember what company did this study, showing that impact on public opinions of big companies is way much larger than governments' power to impress public opinion. So and I'm not talking Google or Facebook but I'm talking about the big fashion brands. They have billion followers, and to be honest, it's important to also to notice that a very the least inclusive industry ever. I mean, fashion has always been about having something that no one else had, or something unique, something made for you, only for you, has now been forced to change drastically and to become, more open and inclusive. And this is even if that might happen also for business reasons, sometimes in a little, in a very cynical way, I do still think that as a very important and positive impact on the life of people. When I think we just sent to press this special beauty issue of my magazine of the beauty industry is extremely interesting from this point of view. If you see how the models of fashion, of beauty campaigns have changed in these last few years, becoming showing that beauty that goes through very different ways, and beauty can have different sizes, different skin tones, different haircuts, different into the fashion and into the beauty industry as a very, I think, as a very positive impact on a lot of young people that might not feel comfortable enough about their skin, about their size, about their face, so if I have to pick one, I would say that the opportunity of beauty and fashion brands to show their young clients and young audience that nowadays the idea of beauty itself is very different and much more open is a very important thing that they can do, and very positive. Again, you can say that they do it because the more people are included, the more clients they can reach. But still, bottom line, to me, I have a very positive vision on that, because one girl somewhere in the world feels more included because she saw a fashion campaign showing someone not too far away from her. That still makes the point, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I think they could even do more in terms of green brands. For example, Adidas, who brought out like one sneaker or something which was made out of ocean plastic. And I'm asking myself, yeah, that's great, but why don't you do more of those? Or why don't you produce every of your sneakers out of ocean plastic? That would be a statement. And I think they, like brands like Adidas or Nike, or even bigger, like real fashion brands, could do so much more in just telling a great story and bringing them to younger generations. So they think, oh, that's cool, I'm wearing like ocean plastic now. And I think they could have a way bigger impact on them. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think that ties in very well with the next, and I guess given the time, last question. There was already talk that sustainable fashion is still often very expensive and you have to be able to afford it. But there's also already the trend of large fast fashion brands which write sustainability on the flags. How can that be evaluated? And do either of you know whether such brands are already concerned with the question of sustainable production of images?
So the last question is, yeah, it's hard to say. So I think they are not looking into sustainable photography, for example, H&M or like the biggest brands, or there are even so many sustainable brands, fair fashion brands, who are not looking into that small part of their supply chain. Like media is also a part of their supply chain, I think, and also the media where they're just distributing all their photos and videos. So I think there's a really there's a hard way to do to get to them, to get to those, to become more aware that sustainable photography exists, that you can be more sustainable in every way of producing media and producing the clothing as well, the fashion. So it's super important, but I really don't know how they get more aware. So I'm trying to educate them, or to get into them and say, hey, I'm a sustainable fashion photographer. Let's work to get together. But that's hard to do, you know. The first part, yeah, I mean, there's like H&M who are doing greenwashing, of course. I don't think they're thinking of fashion photography in a sustainable way. And I think it's a problem that they do this because they have less than 1% ethically made fashion, but they're still educating that they're kind of green, which is a bad thing for it's actually a bad thing for every brand who's doing this like 100%, and it's kind of punch in their faces. but that's your open market. It's sadly how it is. So I don't really have an answer to that. So maybe Mr. Farnetti has a smart idea.
No, I don't. I was just thinking about it. It's off topic, but I watched yesterday. I don't know if any of you have seen the documentary that Netflix did about the rise and fall of Abercrombie and Fitch, and it's quite interesting in some different ways, including the fact that for that specific brand, the connection between what the company was doing and the photography that was showing what they were doing was so, strong. I mean, the fashion was exactly following the vision of that photographer that I'm not going to mention, and the other way around. So when that, and it was the reason for the success of that brand. But then eventually, when it became clear to anyone that at least that's a story that the movie says, that that brand was clearly not inclusive, not diverse, the absolutely opposite of being diverse. The problems the brand had, and the end of the success of the brand and the CEO kind of happened simultaneously with the fall of that photographer that ended up in trouble for several different ways. So this doesn't answer to the question, but I mean, but I'm just mentioning this to show that how much fashion photography can in good and bad ways influence the destiny of a brand. So let's just close this to hoping that this big fast fashion companies, I mean, if you want to make a difference, it should start from big companies. It doesn't make and I mean, we're all happy about young fashion designers that go green. I mean, luckily all the new talents that that we covered on Vogue and on that are entering into the industry today are 100% aware of the importance of being sustainable. And I'm not saying that this doesn't make a difference. It will make a difference. But if we want to make a difference today, we should start from the huge fashion brands, including fast fashion. So let's see if any of them understand that also through using sustainable fashion photography, they can actually make a difference.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I'd say these were perfect closing words. Simon Veith, Emanuele Farnetti, thank you so much for your time, for your answers. Unfortunately, this webinar doesn't have the function where you can include an icon which shows applauding hands, because otherwise I would activate mine now. Thank you so much. Before we close, I just remind you that on the Wednesday, 11th of May, 4 o'clock, there's a cleanup activity at the Kunsthalle Mannheim, and afterwards, from 6 o'clock on, there's a talk on waste identity on the artist and with the artist Aido Khan, also at the Kunsthalle Mannheim. You're all cordially invited. For the time being, thank you again to both of you for your time, for your answers, and I'm wishing everyone a very nice evening, and I hope to see you soon again. And then we can see what meanwhile has changed in fashion photography, and I hope it's for the better. Thank you so much. Have a nice evening.
Thank you so much. Have a good one.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Ciao.
Thank you.
Bye. Ciao.